Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Seeds and Weeds podcast. Are you a gardener, a forager, a farmer, or herbalist? Maybe you're just a little plant curious. Well, you've come to the right place. This is Seeds and Weeds. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Thank you so much for tuning in. We've got a super awesome show for you today. We're going to be taking a deep dive into seeds. We're going to be exploring some of the ideas that I get into when I teach about seeds, when we teach about gardening and seed saving. We're going to talk a little bit about growing a Three Sisters garden, and we're really going to dig into corn, the different types of corn that we can grow, plus some advice on how to grow corn to help you get the best harvest of this very important staple crop. We've got Heather back in the studio with us, of course. Before we get into everything, let's do some personal updates. What is new, Heather?
Well, we just got back from Spain.
Well, we were near Barcelona, and then we went south. We got a car. We went down to Tarragona, and I think that was your favorite part of the whole trip, wasn't it?
Definitely. Tarragona was a beautiful, small, quaint, historically artistic town, and we felt really welcomed there. We had a beautiful 3-bedroom terraced apartment right in the walking district.
It was super fun too, and we did a lot of exploring. We went to Montserrat, into the mountains. We took a cable car up into the mountain, which was super awesome. We went to Park Güell and explored, and we saw so many awesome plants.
It was fun to see plants that we could identify and things that we would see in the States, especially weeds and your common plants around. We, of course, saw a bunch of plantain, and we saw some other common things like rosemary was everywhere.
All up the mountain, the whole mountain, from a distance, you could see all the speckles of green on the mountain. But once we got up close to it, almost all of that was rosemary all over the mountain, in bloom too. It was so beautiful.
And we saw a bunch of red buds and wild thyme.
So much good stuff. So anyways, Heather did a blog post about it. She did a little write-up, a recap sort of our adventures, but specifically the plants that we got to meet and greet while we were on our trip. So that's over on our Patreon. If you want to go check that out, you absolutely should. And while we're talking about the Patreon, of course, we got to do a little bit of a shout out to the new patrons that have joined us since the last episode. And we got a handful of them here. We've got Sabrina Elvidge, Patty Berryhill, Leanne Call, Nicole Robinson, Tracy Panel, Chris Blomenberg, David Hall, and Karina Anderson. Thank you guys so much for being a part of our community. We really appreciate all of your support. Of course, it's the support of our patrons that helps keep this show on the air, right? Much of the work that we do at Small House Farm is supported through the Patreon, in particular, this podcast. So if you enjoy the podcast, you like what we're doing here, and you want to support our work, check out the Patreon community. Not only can you support us through a monthly subscription, but you also get a ton of perks. You get all this exclusive content and little videos, these blogs that Heather's writing. Some tiers you get the seasonal herb boxes that we talk about sometimes, all sorts of good stuff. You've heard about it before. Go check it out. It's patreon.com/smallhousefarm. And of course, like always, the link is down in the show notes.
And now that we've been back from Spain, we had to get started right away on our seeds. We were a little later than normal because we took this trip, but we know it was all going to work out fine. So we've been actively, planting and preparing ever since our return to the States.
Yes, and I was sweating it a little bit because, like Heather, you just said, it is a little bit later than we would have started some things, particularly things like peppers and eggplants and that sort of stuff, or some of these herbs and flowers that need to get started early. We're a little bit behind on that, but boy, the things are already popping up. I saw Heather just did a couple stories on Instagram that are pictures of all the little baby plants popping up. And so they're catching right up. Everything's going to work out just fine. But we thought, since obviously we're planting right now, it would be a very appropriate topic for the podcast today to talk about seeds, even more about seeds. Specifically, I think I want to talk a lot about things that I teach people about seeds. When we talk about seeds, some of these concepts and ideas, the most prevalent one, of course, is that seeds are everywhere. Seeds are in everything that we do. A lot of times in a presentation, I will start to teach about seed saving or whatever it might be. I say, well, we got to understand what a seed really is before we can think about why we might want to save it, And so I always like to start with the Webster's Dictionary definition. And Webster's Dictionary would define a seed as the fertilized and ripened ovule of a flowering plant containing an embryo and capable of germination in order to produce a new seed, which is obviously accurate. And you can tell I've said that 1,000 times,
He wasn't even reading that. He can just spit that out like it's up there in his brain.
It's in there with many, many other things. But that one's right on the top of my mind right now, because seeds are in everything. Of course, Webster's Dictionary's definition is accurate, but as gardeners and seed savers and herbalists, and however we come to the world of plants, we know that seeds are so much more than that. Seeds are they're everything. Often I'll use the example of the Almond Joy candy bar, right, as the visual of how prevalent seeds are in everything that we do. Because an Almond Joy candy bar, that's a really daily, mundane object that you can find, well, practically anywhere. You know what I mean? What are the three main ingredients of the Almond Joy candy bar?
Almonds, coconut,
and chocolate, right? All three of which are seeds. But if we really delve into the ingredients of the Almond Joy candy bar, honestly, the number one ingredient, of course, is high fructose corn syrup, which is ironic. We'll come back into that a little bit because we're talking a lot about corn today. But that is also a seed. The Almond Joy candy bar is like 97% seed. Without seed, it simply wouldn't exist, right? And if we take that idea and look around, we will see that seeds are in every single thing that we do. Let's dig up some more examples.
I mean, obviously, obvious things like our cereals are made out of seeds. Oatmeal is a seed. Our peanut butters, our oils, candy bars, like we mentioned. Coffee is a seed. Noodles are made from seeds.
On my sheet here, it literally says noodles are seeds.
Noodles are seeds.
And think about it, right? Because a noodle is made from wheat. A noodle is made from rice, whatever it might be. Those are seeds. And that's how we can think about cereal. When you go down the cereal aisle, you've got all these different boxes, all these different logos, all these different products. But on the back of them, they are either corn or wheat. That is what they're all made from. They're all the same thing, just in different packages. All of them are seeds.
And rice is the seed. So, noodles or rice or however you might get your starchy foods in your meals, those are all coming from seeds. Beans, that is the seed, So it's really cool to think about how much we actually consume the pure seed in our food.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a big part of the diet, even though you may not realize that what you're eating is seeds. Or even let's think about the clothes that we're wearing right now. Cotton is just a dispersal mechanism for a seed, So, I mean, seeds are prevalent in daily life. So after you get done listening to today's episode, go about the rest of your day and look at everything from the point of view of seed. And you will see that seeds are everything. Let's take a quick break to sit down with our friend Greg Peterson, who is the owner of Urban Farm and host of the Urban Farm podcast. In 2011, Greg co-founded the Great American Seed Up. So I thought, let's catch up with Greg and learn more about the Great American Seed Up.
Imagine a 10,000 square foot room with 100 different varieties of open pollinated seeds. Your job is to scoop however many scoops that you want into this Ziploc bag that we have there, and then put a business card that has all of the information on it that you would get on a seed packet. That goes in the bag, and then you mark your little tick sheet. Then you go on to the next one. We've done this 11 times now, over 11 years, and super energized the local seed economy in Phoenix. We get over 600 people scooping seeds every year. It's just, the energy in the room just sizzles. Our next one is the first weekend of November 2025. And we've actually had people flying in from California and Colorado to attend this event.
In 2020, when the pandemic hit, folks couldn't get together in Phoenix to enjoy the Great American Seed Up. But Greg and his friends got together, and with an ingenious idea, Seed Up in a Box was born.
Well, what we did is we adapted. Why don't we do a seed up in a box and give people the same kind of deal and let them do their own Great American Seed Up? We have bundles that we've made up, and our basic bundle is 25 varieties of seeds with 10 portions or 10 packets in each one of those varieties. So you're getting 250 packets of seeds. They run about 80 cents a packet. Having a good solid seed stock, having our neighborhoods with garden seeds in them, people growing them out, and having the seeds be really good seed is really important. Having harvestable food in your yard is amazing, and you can do it.
Seed Up in a Box is an awesome and affordable way for you to get seeds for your community, for community gardens, and for seed libraries. Check it out at seedupinabox.com. That's pretty awesome, isn't it, Greg?
Amazing.
Another thing that I like to get into when I teach about seeds and plants and herbalism or whatever even the topic might be, this is a theme that comes up in almost everything that I'm talking about lately, it seems like, is this idea of relationships with plants. The relationships that we have with plants, the plants have with the earth, the different plants have with each other, whatever it might be. It's just such an important concept. If we're an herbalist and we're making medicine for our family and communities, relationship is at the heart of what we're going to do there. But even simply as a gardener, having this relationship with plants, understanding what a plant likes to be happy, and then providing it for that plant, treating nature with respect. All of these are concepts of relationship. So wherever we're coming to the plant world, however, whatever brings us here, we will benefit from nurturing and fostering these relationships with plants. So one thing that I thought would be fun for us to get into is this idea of the relationships that plants have with each other, right? And, we could say things like companion planting and that sort of thing is, obviously great examples. And I think the most prominent example of companion planting that most people might be familiar with is the idea of a Three Sisters garden.
And it's one of our actually most popular YouTube videos, like historically. We've had more people watch this video than any other video on our YouTube page, but it's old. It's the quality of the video is even a little low, but it's cool because it really describes the Three Sisters relationships and how you can utilize it in your garden.
Yeah. In that video, it's funny because, well, we made it back in 2020 and, for some reason we seem to have a lot more time on our hands in 2020 than we did up until that point. So we were able to really explore this idea of making these videos. And that's kind of how the YouTube channel got launched, really, was in 2020. Even our Instagram and stuff, we weren't doing a lot of that stuff until we had that time to get into it. And it's been really nice for us to foster relationships with our community utilizing these platforms. But this video that we did about the Three Sisters Garden, now at the heart of it, I'd gotten this book, Buffalo Bird Woman's Garden. And Buffalo Bird Woman was a Hadassah native. And these folks had come and chatted with her a little bit about what her life was like growing up. And she had shared all this information about, many aspects of indigenous life. But the part that the book was focused on was gardening. And there's a couple of chapters in there all about this Three Sisters garden. And I was familiar with the idea, and I was like, let's try to replicate this knowledge that she's sharing with us. So that's the premise of the video, is us following her advice on how to grow it. So we did with the mounted hills and the corn and that sort of thing. But the Three Sisters garden, let's kind of dig in maybe a little bit into what the relationships are that the plants have there.
Yeah, so we're gonna pull a couple clips out of this video just for fun. So we're gonna first see what 2020 Ben said about how this corn is gonna grow in the Three Sisters situation.
Now the corn is going to grow here on these mounds, and they're going to grow obviously a nice tall corn stalk. Then the beans that we're going to plant are then going to climb this stalk and use the plant as support. What's cool about that is that the corn, being a grass, Poaceae, is a heavy nitrogen feeder, and the beans are actually nitrogen fixers, putting nitrogen into the soil to feed the plants. So we talked about a couple of interesting relationships right there, actually. I love going back to the, into the Wayback Machine and digging up these old clips like this. That's super fun. So a couple of things that we talked about there was, first, how the corn stalk becomes the pole that the bean climbs. So the corn is saying, hey, I can provide this service for you in a way. And then in return, the bean, as it's climbing up the pole, says, oh, I got something for you. I'm going to put nitrogen into the soil for you. And the corn's like, oh, thanks. And can use that nitrogen to grow a taller plant, which in turn becomes a sturdier bean pole. So that's a really cool synergistic relationship happening right there.
So what about the squash? What is the benefit of the squash?
Now, these guys are going to grow all around throughout the mounds, and they're going to create a nice ground cover, which is going to suppress the weeds. It's It's going to retain the moisture, and it's going to keep the raccoons out of our corn when it's harvest time. So the squash is kind of running defense, right? Especially these older varieties of squash. If you've ever grown them, or next time you grow them, try to observe, you'll see that the leaves and the stems are a little bit more prickly. They're a little bit more rough to rub up against. So that's unpleasant for raccoons and deer. So they're less likely to get into your corn patch. So the squash is kind of running defense out there, keeping these predators out of your garden. But at the same time, these big squash leaves, they're shading the soil. So they're suppressing the weeds. They're not allowing these weeds to grow. They're keeping the moisture in the soil. They're keeping the soil cool. They're doing a lot of work there. And they fill in the space as well between all of the rows. They fill right in, and that becomes the space that they get to grow in. So that's a really cool addition to the relationship there.
So, and part of the concept is building these mounds that the corn will grow up, the squash will grow up. Why do we need to be using mounds?
Mounds themselves actually make a nice support for the roots of the corn. As the corn grows, it's really easy to hill it back up to give it that support so they don't get blown over in the wind later in the season. Also, it makes it very easy to weed, right? Absolutely, Past Ben. You are right. It does make it a lot easier to weed. At first, before the squash is grown in and filled in the rows, there's that empty space. But if it's on a hill, you don't weed anything off the hill. We can come through with our hoe. We can clean it up really quick and easy. It made it really efficient for cleaning it up. But like I also mentioned there, is having that hill allows us, it's very simple to hill it up further around that corn to create a nice support for that corn. Because as you mount up around the base of the corn, the parts that become buried will also start to put out roots, right? So you get a sturdier, stronger plant that way. And this was very important for us here at Small House because we weren't growing the corn in a place that was quite getting as much sun as it really wanted to. So sometimes we got a little bit leggier of corn, which made it more susceptible to wind damage and stuff like I mentioned in the video. And so by putting it on these hills and mounting it up, it helped us kind of counteract that effect so we could work with that. So that's interesting to think, of course, about the relationship that the corn was having with its environment and how we had to help support it through its challenges.
Well, that's interesting. And then obviously, so we talked about the corn, the squash, and then what about the beans and how deep and when should I plant those beans and what does that look like?
Now, the rule of thumb when you're planting seeds is you want to plant your seed at a depth that's approximately 1.5 times the width of the seed, right? 1.5 times the width of the seed. So you can see this is a larger seed, so we're going to put it in a slightly bigger hole. If you're planting a small patch like this is a quick, easy thing to do by hand. You simply just make your hole, drop in the seed, cover it up. About 1.5 inches into the ground right there. Yeah, an important thing to note here too is the timing on when we want to plant this stuff. So we plant that corn first, and when you watch the video, I'll put a link to this in the show notes. When you watch the video, you'll see that the corn is already well established. I mean, it's 8-10 inches tall already. And we want to wait until that corn is that large before we plant those beans, because if we plant the beans and the corn at the same time, the beans are going to germinate a little bit faster and they're far more aggressive and they will grow too fast, too tall, and they're going to pull down your little corn plant. So you got to give your corn time to get established before you bring the beans in. Another thing to note about the beans, though, is the type of bean that we're going to grow here. Obviously, we're talking about the beans growing up the corn. So we're not growing a bush variety by any means. But a typical pole variety bean is going to grow a vine that's so long, 8, 10, 12 feet, whatever it might be. It's going to be too tall for our corn. So in these situations, we grow what's known as a half runner. So it's a pole type variety. It does send out runners, but they only grow maybe 3 or 4 feet, which is perfect for growing up corn, And so you'll see in almost every example that you'll find of a traditional indigenous Three Sisters garden, they're using these half runner type beans. So we have grown a number of different varieties over the years of the half runners. The one that we talked about earlier in the year was the Ottawa bean, which is indigenous to this area as well. And it does really, really well for us growing up. We've grown it on sunflowers. We've done it on corn. It's very important that you grow the right varieties to thrive together, right?
Do we have any half runners on the seed collection online?
Well, we did have the Ottawa bean. I don't know if that's still in stock. And then there's the Anakin Cavilli Giant, which is actually the bean that we're planting in the video. Is that Anakin Cavilli Giant, which is a super special bean. If you've been around the Small House universe for any amount of time, You've surely heard us talk about it before. And it's a nice big seed. I even say that in the video. I'm talking about how big the seed is. It's a big honking bean. You know what I mean? So they're very meaty, but it's a half runner type. So they'll grow, about 3.5 feet. So it's perfect for growing up corn. But even if you don't have corn, you can grow it on a trellis and it's going to do really nice for you. But again, it's about understanding the relationship that these plants have with each other, right? So you have to understand that a typical pole bean is going to be too aggressive to be in a healthy relationship with corn, so you've got to find the right bean for the corn that you're growing.
That's really cool.
It is pretty cool.
Okay, so let's dig in a little bit further into the corn and how we can make growing corn successful for our gardens.
I often say when I talk about corn, when I'm doing like the Grow Great Vegetables program or whatever, and we talk about the plants that we're going to choose to grow in our garden, I always talk about how much I love growing corn.
I really like corn.
There's something about growing corn that brings me much joy, most certainly. And to talk about what we were covering at the beginning about how seeds are like in everything, I think corn is such a perfect example of a seed that is in everything. I mean, the corn, especially here in the United States, the corn is in almost everything that we're going to encounter in those middle aisles in the grocery store for sure. So obviously the examples here would be corn oil, corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup. Goodness gracious, it's the number one ingredient in the candy bar, right? The high fructose corn syrup. So you can find corn in there. Most processed foods have corn in it in some form in those two things. Much of the corn, we have a lot of field corn grown in the United States. We're in the Midwest, right? Here in Michigan. So, I mean, there's millions of acres of corn everywhere. Some of that is for cattle feed. That's where a lot of corn is going to go, is to feeding cattle. And another large percentage of that is for ethanol production. So it's even fueling our vehicles.
And there's a bunch of different types of corn. Like, I mean, everybody's familiar with just a sweet corn. That's what we buy in the middle of the summer to enjoy that summer sunshine feeling with, is a grilled hot piece of sweet corn.
It's corn.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Or popcorn, what I mean? Popcorn, yep. Everybody likes that. Or you go to the movies, you get some popcorn, you have some popcorn at home. Flour corn, of course, is another variety. There's really four main types of corn that we're going to encounter. We've talked about sweet corn, popcorn, flour corn, and then there's flint corn, which is kind of in between a flour corn and a popcorn as far as the structure of the seed. It's a little more dense. But those corns can be used. I mean, flour corn is very soft, can be easily ground into a flour to be made into cornmeal, tamales, whatever you want to make with it. Where a flint corn is a little bit more dense, like I said. It often can be nixtamalized is the process, which there's modern versions of how corn is nixtamalized now, but indigenous North Americans would actually use wood ash, the lime that can be found in the wood ash, mixed with water to activate that lime. They would wash the corn. They would boil the corn in it. It takes that outer coating off of the corn. It causes the corn to swell up. You would know it as hominy if you saw it at the grocery store. But what it also does is it makes the nutrients in the corn more available to the human digestive system. So it actually makes corn healthier. But yeah, the flint corn, nixtamalized, the flour corn for making cornmeal, popcorn for snacking, and sweet corn for summer grilling, So there's really a corn for every scenario.
So if you want to grow corn in your garden, do you have some, advice that we could give our listeners on the best growing methods and tips and tricks for their garden?
Oh, sure. I mean, so first off, we want to wait to plant our corn until after any chance of frost has passed, Well, the corn does not like that cold weather. So wait till the chance of frost has passed, but then also allow your soil time to warm up. You want to make sure your soil's warm before you start planting those seeds. And you can't judge this based on like large commercial cornfields that are being grown. A lot of those cornfields that are growing this field corn, those varieties of corn have been developed to be far more tolerant of cold, moist soil. So those folks can get those seeds in early. So for many of the corns that we're going to be growing at home, they are not as cold tolerant as far as the soil goes, those seeds. So wait until that soil warms up. I'm going to tell you like 50 degrees Fahrenheit. We typically won't start planting our corn here. It would have been June 1st, maybe the last week of May, depending on how the weather is. But you want to make sure around the same time that the soil's warming up to plant your beans is a good time to start getting your corn planted. So wait till it's warm. You're going to want to plant it in a place that's going to get full sun. And we're going to need at least 6 to 8 hours of sun every day. The full sun, the better. The more sun you can get, better. Corn's a heavy feeder, particularly nitrogen, because it's a grass like we've talked about, which is why working it with beans is so helpful. But I've even seen folks grow in between rows of corn something like clover, or whatever, which is going to work really nice because the clover is also going to help suppress weed growth. And the clover, Fabaceae, same plant family as beans. So it's also a nitrogen fixer. So it'll also put nitrogen down into the soil. So that's really nice. You're going to plant our corn seeds about 1 inch deep or so. A small plot you can do by hand. You could use a dibble, like a little stick to poke the holes. You can use a planting mechanism, depending on what your scale is. But you want to set it be about 1 inch deep and about 8 to 12 inches spacing between the plants. I like to do about 1 foot. One thing that was just so fascinating about following the traditional Three Sisters method was the amount of space that all these plants were given. Very different than what we would think about when we think about like a modern American cornfield. It was very, very different spacing. So if you're interested in that, you can check out the video. I won't say a bunch of numbers to confuse you now, but the spacing is definitely different.
But also those field corns are also designed to have less, they're designed to shoot up, be tall and skinny and take up less space.
And not put out the tillers and that sort of thing. Exactly. Those modern corns are bred for that type of growing style. So it's a different relationship, right? Absolutely. That's a good point. So that's an important thing to be aware of. And then you want to make sure your corn plants get about 1 inch of water every week. If you're not getting enough rainwater, you're going to have to supplement that, obviously. But 1 inch a week is pretty good for getting your corn nice and happy.
And then what's different about corn seed versus other seeds is that the pollination, the cross-pollination possibilities are huge. That corn can be wind pollinated up to 5 miles away, right?
It could happen. I mean, that's a little bit more rare of that sort of a distance. It just depends on where you're at. If you're in a big open space, absolutely, that pollen, it's a very light pollen. So like we said, unlike other crops. So if we think about things like our tomatoes and peppers and that sort of thing, those are self-pollinating. If we think about crops like our melons and cucumbers, those require insects to move that pollen because that pollen is heavier. So it takes an insect to move it from one place to the next. But the corn has a very light pollen and it's designed to be blown on the wind. So the tassels at the top of the plant is the male pollen shedding portion. That's the flower up there. And then the silks that will eventually form the ear that we harvest, that's the female pollen receptive portion of the flower, right? So the pollen blows off the tassels at the top and it blows all around and then it lands on those silks. And each one of those silks will catch 1 grain of pollen, which will go back down to that silk and form 1 kernel of corn, right?
Wow.
Yeah, it's totally awesome for sure.
It's pretty bizarre. So it's something you want to think about wherever you're planting your corn as well. How close is the next corn field, especially your big farmer field corn? Because I don't really want it cross-pollinating my heirloom indigenous corn that I'm planting. Now, we're pretty close to actually some cornfields occasionally as they swap through their fields. But we do have a nice chunk of woods that separates us from the cornfields, which tends to have helped the cross-pollination possibilities. And there's been a couple times we planted corn that we did notice that they were supposed to all be yellow, and we had a couple white corns popping through, right?
Vice versa. And that's what you'll see when you accidentally cross-pollinate with a field corn is it's usually a yellow kernel or two. One of the cool things about corn is that it shows cross-pollination in that first generation. Like if I cross-pollinated squash or tomatoes or something like that, I wouldn't know until I saved those seeds, planted those seeds, and then that next generation I would see a difference. But in corn, you see it right away. You can see the change right away. So when you open up that ear, if it's different looking than what you expected, often yellow kernels, that's a clue that you got a couple random pollens that came in. Our closest farm field that will grow corn used to be about 2 to 2.5 miles away from here, the guy up on the corner. But now down the road, there's a guy that he's been growing soybeans. It's likely he's going to grow corn soon again, and he's about a mile away. We are tucked away in the woods a little bit, so we're a little protected, but it has happened here. So, I mean, some of the things that we can do for work around here, you can certainly hand pollinate corn, but that's quite a chore. So what I recommend is just, again, if you can understand what your neighbors are going to do, what they're going to be growing, so you can work around that. And if you're in this type of scenario where they're growing a farm corn, then you understand basically the amount of time you have until it flowers. So if you can alternate your planting so your corn isn't pollen receptive when their corn is pollen shedding. So if you can get your corn to flower or tassel at a different time than what theirs is, then you could avoid that completely. So that's going to come back to understanding, well, what type of corn are they growing? What type of corn am I growing? What's the life cycle of these plants?
That sounds kind of difficult. I mean, it could take a conversation with your neighbor.
That shouldn't be too difficult.
Well, of course, but it's definitely something you want to think about.
It's something to take into consideration for sure, especially if you're trying to preserve the genetics of the corn that you're growing. If you're growing something historic, if you're growing like a family heirloom or something, you definitely want to be aware of that for sure. I also recommend, because of this wind pollination, that we grow the corn in a block, like in a square, as opposed to a long row, right? If you grow, let's say you're growing 100 plants, instead of growing 100 long, if you grew 10 by 10 square, right? Because of this pollination, the way that the plant's pollinated, having them in a clump like that, you're going to get much better pollination results. If you ever get an ear of corn when you grow it where it's like a lot of the kernels haven't formed or whatever, that's because those particular silks didn't get pollen, right? So if you can grow them in a block, you're going to get better pollination, which means fuller ears, which means more seed, more food, all the things that we're looking for.
So when should I be harvesting the corn?
So it depends on what corn we're growing. Now, if we're growing a sweet corn, the sweet corn is going to be ready when the ears are in what's known as the milk stage, right? So we're going to be able to identify that because the silks are going to turn brown. When the silks turn brown, it kind of shrivel up and look dead, but the husk itself is still green. That's when the sweet corn is ready to harvest. You can pull them off. And if you're not sure, you can peel back the husk a little bit and kind of poke one of the kernels with your thumb, and it should leak out like a white looking juice, the milk stage. That's why they call it that. And that's how you know it's just right, and you can pick it and pull it. But if you're growing, flint corn or flour corn, popcorn, or if you're just simply growing for seed, we have to allow those kernels to stay on the plant until they dry. Flour corn, flint corn, popcorn, it's the exact same stage of their life that it is when we harvest the seed, right? So we're going to leave those on the plant as long as possible. And the whole husk is going to get brown and crispy. The whole plant's going to look dead. And when the telltale sign here is that the ear itself, the ear of corn, will start to turn just like a clock hand, turn right over and point down. And when it points down, that's when it's fully dry and ready to go. So we're going to collect them up, peel those husks back, and then put that corn out somewhere so it can further drying down before you shell it off of the cob. And then you're ready to go.
And for the most part, the husk will keep some of the moisture, the rain, if it's, we're talking about fall time now when this is happening. But you do want to be semi-aware of when there might be a giant storm. Oh, do I need to get this dried corn off the plant before we have a, thunderstorm where my corn could topple right over and get too moist and ruined, or just get too much water in it. So at that time, you really want to be paying attention to the weather and decide when is the best time to get this corn out of the field.
Absolutely right. And then get it harvested, get it shucked, get it dry, and then you're going to be ready. You can shell it by hand. There's little machines you can use, all sorts of different ways to get the wonderful little seeds off of the ears, and then you're ready to go. And then you've grown some awesome corn. So, whether you're growing corn or any other plant this year, whatever it is that's got you excited about gardening, think about the relationship that you are developing with this plant and watching the plant and seeing the relationship that it has with the earth and with the plants around it, because whatever we're growing, this sort of thing is happening. And it makes us better gardeners to take the time to observe that. But it also, I think, in a way, can kind of make us better people, So getting out there and spending time in the garden, growing herbs, growing food, whatever it is, helps us grow as well. Well, here we are, and what do you know? We are at the end of yet another show. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and big thanks to Heather for hanging out with us once again. Remember, if you enjoy the podcast, you can always show your support by joining our community on Patreon. You can find a link to that and so much more at seedsandweedspodcast.com. This episode was edited and produced by all of us here at Small House Farm, and the music we're dancing around to right now is a little Irish dance from Elbin Go. Thanks again for tuning in, my friends. I'm Bevin Cohen, and we'll see you next time.